this session to take place. So good morning, everyone. My name is Chandra Tettleton. I'm with New Orleans Business Alliance, and I have the pleasure of working in the strategic neighborhood development sector as the Director of Project Management. Today, for our second quarter webinar series around project program management and timekeeping, and not just, hey, the meeting is late, the meeting is running over, but really, how do I project manage my calendar, my time to help support me to output for the community to do the work, including attachment C from your CA, including filling out project proposals, project reports. A lot of your programmatic and project management tools that you use and you can implement, including your goals, your vision, your mission, will be aligned with what you need to submit for a capital outlay state dollars, for your CEA for the state, if you're a nonprofit, for you going, or a state board, for you going after grant dollars. This all has to be aligned and clear, and they may give you a rewrite, but most will just deny and then tell you why or not. And a lot of it is because they can't grasp the concept and link the budget to it, and it's not within the scope of the work that they're trying to execute. There's a lot of currently dollars coming down our pipeline in Louisiana focused on blue-green infrastructure, which is like this large term with several definitions. But a lot of that funding is dealing with and addressing how do we mitigate the environmental hazards from the past and put some stack deck or multiple funding sources to do so. And with that, from a brownfield application with the Department of Environmental Quality or the Environmental Protection Agency or Brownfield Association or our Regional Planning Commission who works on these projects as well in New Orleans and the region, you all need to create a site plan, a community plan. These are all requirements to even submit, and they all include your project, your proposal set up in the framework that the illustrious Ms. Vicki Clark is going to do. I'm going to do a quick segue. Ms. Vicki Clark has, I'm not going to say the years of experience, but very well informed on the roles and responsibilities, board development, structure and culture, strategic thinking and planning, and hails from, as she stated earlier, the hot city of Memphis. I'm going to be in Nashville for my family reunion this summer, so we may need some help. I'll reach out. Over 2 decades, as I said, a long, illustrious history of working with faith-based government, nonprofit entities, and business sector work, and has served on several boards, national boards, American Bar Association. I always remember from one of our previous ones, the Diaper Brigade. Like, I wonder how that's going. Maybe we can get an update on that. And really focuses on diversity, equity, inclusion, mission-driven boards, being a servant leader, a volunteer engagement person, a woman's leadership and mentor to so many. And as I said previously, in several associations across the United States and beyond. So thank you so much, Ms. Vicki Clark, for coming today virtually by way of Memphis. You can put your little hand claps. I have new reactions in my assortment. Yay, I think I have a balloon. There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, look at that. It is so nice to be back with you all. It's been a while. This is a topic that is interesting, but it can make you crazy. I'm gonna tell you the truth. You know, as Chandra said, this is the way she operates. A lot of people don't operate like this, but we're gonna get into this. I want to first introduce you to my business partner, Shayla Sanchez. I'll let her introduce herself. I'll tell a little bit about her. She herself is an amazing business leader and a nonprofit leader, and she's in Pittsburgh. So introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Chela Sanchez. I helped start a Latino scholarship program, which is now old enough to drink. So it's happened. It's been around for a while now. I also am the founder of Adelante Community Partners. If you're familiar with Spanish, Adelante means forward, and it's also a way to greet people, to welcome them. So this organization strives to create bridges between communities in order to showcase and highlight Latino culture. Our signature event is the Day of the Dead race, which will be celebrating its 10-year anniversary this fall. So very excited about that, and also very excited to share the information that we have put together for you all today. I'm in Pittsburgh. I don't know if somebody said that, but that's where I'm at.
All right, let's get started. Taylor will kick us off. We're going to use a poll feature. How many people are on? Chandra, how many?
Currently 7. I'm gonna send out an email real quick to
Okay, but
remind those people.
so Taylor, you can go on and introduce the poll feature, and then we'll get going.
So I unmuted myself. So we like to have interactivity throughout our presentations. If you have a secondary device or have access to your handy dandy phone, you could scan the QR code when we get to that slide and weigh in anonymously to your thoughts. It helps engage people through the conversation that might help somebody who's struggling. So please feel free to share once we get to that section. June is many months that we celebrate, including Pride Month. It's also Immigrant Heritage Month. I am a child of immigrants. My parents are from Mexico. My mom is currently there. The bulk of my family is there. And let's, use these months to highlight and amplify what it means to be someone in these communities and, be an ally where you can. It's also Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. And June is Men's Health Month. So if you have a friend or loved one who isn't taking care of themselves, there's lots of resources to help get people on the right track. I will continue with the Indigenous Land Acknowledgement. We started doing the Indigenous Land Acknowledgement as a way to increase our cultural competency and actually find out about it's very interesting. If you start looking at land acknowledgements, you can't unsee it. If you I know in my hometown, a lot of the Indigenous names are names of different streets, venues. There is a nod to them throughout, but people don't actually stop and do the history. But once you start looking at these things within your community, I'm sure you will see parallels within different businesses and notable parks and alike. So I respectfully acknowledge that the New Orleans Business Alliance is on the traditional ancestral lands of the Chatata, Yankani, Choctaw, and Chickasaw people. The process of knowing and acknowledging the land where Choctaw, Yankani, Choctaw, and Chicamacha people inhabited is a way of honoring and expressing gratitude for the ancestral people who were on this land before us. And for that, we owe a debt of gratitude. For the Indigenous people who came before us, for without them, the Americas would not exist.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Shayla. Let's get started. Why don't you introduce yourselves and tell us what organization you're from? There's just a few people, so let's have you talk with us. Somebody start.
Well, my name is Dawn Abear. Oh, hold on a second. I'm Dawn Abear, and I'm the president of the East New Orleans Neighborhood Advisory Commission in New Orleans East.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Good morning,
Maria?
all.
Hi.
I'm Otis Tucker. I'm a local entrepreneur here in New Orleans. I also serve on 2 economic development district commissions. I'm serving in the capacity of vice chair on both, ironically, and I'm happy to be here and learn.
Welcome, Mr. Otis.
And Ms. Vicki, would you like those, if they can't talk, to put it in the chat?
Sure. Yeah. Just tell us who you are. So we're going to get started. Thank you all for being here. And I want to introduce some of you, and some of you we've worked with before, to Peter Drucker's 5 questions. I call them magic questions, because if you use them in any of the work that you do on behalf of your community, on behalf of nonprofits, business development, these are for corporate, government, anybody. I'm sure many of you have heard of Dr. Drucker. Dr. Drucker was a thought leader. He was an amazing organization development person. And these are the 5 questions that all of our project and program management have to be anchored on. What is your mission? You notice Dr. Drucker does not say, what is your mission statement? We all have mission statements, and people have spent lots of time working on those. But the idea is, where are you trying to go? So when you're working on your projects and your programs, the idea is, where are you trying to go? What's the journey that you're on? Then the next part is, who is your customer? Now, you may not use the term customer. You may use the term students or beneficiaries. Some people use the term clients or patients, or even the environment could be, your customer. It's your primary customer. Who or what is it that you are targeting? And that's your primary customer. And you really have to understand who that customer is now. And in your grant proposals and in your project and program management, be able to target all of your goals toward that customer. And it's so important. That's the primary customer. Now, everybody else is supporting customers. You say, well, what does that mean? The people who provide your grants, the board, anybody and everybody else that it takes to move the mission forward. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today has to do with the work that you're doing around your grants as you're setting up your projects. So, but you have to understand who that primary customer is, and you have to be able to help your stakeholders as well as your funding to understand who that customer is and who that customer is today. Not who that customer was 10 years ago, but who is that customer today? And then the whole idea of value. You say, we did a great job on this grant. Why didn't we get it? It is so important to show what is the value of your project to the funder. You say, well, who won't know that if kids read by 3rd grade, it cuts the school to prison pipeline. You know those things because you live this every day. But when you think about your grant sources, your grant sources and people who are vetting grants, especially parish and state and federal grants, they may not understand. So the part of managing a project or even getting a project started is helping those who you're trying to get money from or resources from to understand the value of this, and not only to the customer, but to the environment, if you will. What does that mean? What is the value of starting a certain project to our entire neighborhood? Now, it may be innate for you, and I'm sure it is, because most of you are so heavily involved in your communities. But remember that the people who are reading your project plans, they are not. And so the idea of being able to articulate value, what are we adding by doing this? What's the difference that this is going to make? Which goes to his next question, what are your results? And when he talks about results, he talks about change lives and change conditions. And we'll talk about these as outcomes. What's going to change as a result of this project? What is going to change? And how do we know? How do we know? Change lives and change conditions. And then the last part goes to, what is your plan? And that's, how do we get there? And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today, is mostly project planning. And then program planning comes up under that. And obviously timekeeping is a very important part of that. So I just want to, and you can use these questions on a macro level. You all are on boards. You can look at it and say, okay, how's the board contributing to the mission? How is what is the board's involvement with the customer? What's the value proposition? What are our results? And then what is our plan? You can take this also for, as you're getting ready to work on your project plan, you can take it down to say, how does this project that we're either applying for or the one that we have now, how does it relate to the mission? If it doesn't, we don't need to apply for it. Now, you might be sitting there saying, lady, we need the money. I've been you. I'm not one of these consultants that's never worked in a nonprofit. I've worked in local nonprofits in Houston. I've worked at national nonprofits. I get it. I totally get it. But the whole idea of you will spend much more time, and we'll talk about how do we know which projects to go for, you know, what really fits. So you can use these 5 questions as you're working on your projects. A lot of this you may be doing through the rearview mirror. And I'm going to encourage you to do this with some of the projects that you have now, if you have not articulated to everybody. It's really important because a lot of what we're going to talk about today, you've already passed some of these stages, but it's okay to go back and kind of rethink it and re-articulate it. So again, let's keep Dr. Drucker's 5 questions in mind. But the main thing is that all of our projects and programs have to be mission driven. The other thing is that we know now that this work should be rooted in justice. It should not be rooted in charity. You say, well, but we're nonprofits. Yes, but it's a mentality. The mentality, and most of us live in communities. I know I do. I moved back to Memphis and I live in the neighborhood that I grew up in. We live in underserved communities. Most of us do. And you notice I use the term underserved, because if all communities got the same service, all our cities would be different. All our neighborhoods would be different. And so the idea of, and we have all been recipients, if you will, of somebody or some program coming in saying they're going to do something, I hate to say it, to us, rather than seeking to empower. And so your projects and your programs need to be able to show how you're not just putting a Band-Aid on something, that you're actually making a difference in the way, going back to Dr. Drucker's change lives and change conditions, and it's based in long-term solutions. You say, well, how do we articulate that? We talk about the journey of the project. Now, most of you do not do longitudinal studies. You don't study kids from 3rd grade to 12th grade. You don't study, what's going to happen to the environment or health, but somebody does. Trust me, somebody does. And so all of that documentation, if you will, is out there. And we know now that most of the inequities in our communities are justice issues. So we want to talk about it, not merely in our projects, not merely in the old way of, we got to help these people, whoever these people are. We got to help these kids. Yes, we're going to do that, but we need to articulate the relationship to the social systems. And that's not the way a lot of us are accustomed to talking. Chandra mentioned that I'm on the board of the National Diaper Bank Network, and we provide, and you all have one in New Orleans, and they provide diapers and period products to families. And it's not, we show babies, but not a lot. We took our logo is not a baby anymore. Our logo is a little star, because the idea is, let's not say, oh, we feel sorry for these families. These are just, families deserve to have basic needs. This is justice issues. Family deserves to have basic needs. People who menstruate deserve to have period products. This is health justice. So the messaging has changed from, oh, these poor families, these poor babies, to everybody deserves basic needs. These are issues rooted in poverty, and they're not rooted in neglect. They're not rooted in bad parenting. So the idea of thinking about these from a justice standpoint, and I think that's going to open up more funding for you versus the charity, oh, poor them type thing. So I'm going to stop and I want to hear from you. What do you think about this concept, and how would you, kind of reframe some of the things you put in your projects? Mr. Otis, what you got for this?
Well, you got my wheels turning. I understand. I've as an entrepreneur personally, and as a DBE, right? we've been taught that to put who we are, who our business is before the DBE, right? The DBE is the sympathetic. We're disadvantaged. Uh, um, we deserve some sort of set aside, and not the fact that we're qualified professionals with competent and capable businesses that happen to have this certification, right? That's extra.
Mhm.
The fact that we're capable, we don't need your handouts. We can do the work just as well as any other subgroup or majority group. And so I get the notion of stating that in a project or a grant application. And it's no more the poor me. We're an educated group of people. We've always knew who we were and what we needed, and it was not to be saved. It was for them to get out of the way.
Mhm.
And so I get it. And again,
And
you
we're
got my
talking, yeah, and we're
word.
talking about system change,
Absolutely.
about,
Yeah.
because the systems weren't set up for many
Yes.
of us. Yeah.
Absolutely. So true.
I mean, so the idea, and I think entrepreneurs have used this a lot, but I'm not sure a lot of nonprofits have thought about it.
Hmm.
And so the idea of actually thinking about this in nonprofits, because a lot of people come to a nonprofit or a neighborhood group kind of with our charity hat on, and
Yeah.
we just need to switch this. So Rudy says
It's
this is
the causes are worthy, right? But it's not the fact that we need your empathy, right? It is something that a problem in society that touches all parts of society and needs to be solved. And we're here to do the work.
and we can do it. We can do
Now,
it.
now you can cut the
Yeah.
check.
And is it Ruta? She says this supports the idea of acknowledging, maintaining, and growing competency of not only service providers, but also of the customer. Exactly. Exactly. How many times have we seen, I think about some of the early food programs, the food banks giving people years ago just bags of food. It had nothing to do with what they needed to eat or anything like that. It was just, here, take some food, versus what do you want? What would you like? How does this connect with health? Versus we just gonna give people some food. So this idea of growing the competency, as she said. So that's really important. Ms. Dawn, you got anything for us? Ms. Dawn? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll keep going.
Miss Cynthia has unmuted.
Yeah,
Oh, Cynthia? Okay.
yeah. I wanted to, well, a couple of things you said, and I wanted to agree. We would go back to the poverty program when we came into the community to help the community. And some of them really did strive. I mean, there was accomplishment. But I have to agree with what you said when they come in. It's not what they're doing for us, it's what they're doing to us. And they come in with this great idea and they're going to do this. And at the end of so many years, you're going to see this, that, and the other. And we don't see any of that. But the persons who have come in left profitable. They've left with more and taken right back from the community and from our people what they were supposed to put in. And in terms of food, right, we give out food. You should give out nowadays. We should be looking at what's healthy, what's good for our people, not just to give us something just to surpass us or to satisfy us for the moment and say, oh, well, this agency, we gave out 100 bags. 100 bags of what?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. And so that's why this strategy of when we're writing our project grants and setting up our programs, we have to think about all of this. Now, some of you are saying, lady, we don't have time to think about this stuff because when these notice of funds available, these NOFAs come down, we are, sitting in our pajamas at home working on these forms and trying to have them not disappear. We have to think about this. That's why we have to be very selective and very strategic in the projects and the programs that we put forward, because it just, just as all of you have said, it has to have a long-term impact and we have to connect it. It's fine to say we're going to give out 100 pounds of food, 100 bags of food, but let's connect it to health. less connected to medical, less connected to justice,
Exactly.
you know, less connected to justice. So now what the project plan looks like is analyzing healthy food. So there's another step in there. We're not just buying food. We're looking at you know, at health issues in our community and saying what types of food. And then guess what? We're also going to put something in there to make sure that we have classes to help people understand what types of food,
Correct.
you know, that they can be eating. And yes, it can be seasoned like y'all like it in New Orleans. It's fine.
Of course.
But do you see how the project actually gets bigger versus we just going to give away some food and we need you to fund the food? No, we need to fund and we need to partner. Every project has to have partners and they have to be real partners. Let me say, again, when I started in nonprofits, we'd run around getting partnership letters, and that was during the day. You had to run around and get them. The 2 days before the project plan was due, we'd run around. Yes, we'll work with them. We didn't have a partnership plan. The idea of, okay, if we were going to do food or, you know, youth work or something like that, how would we work with them? But you build that into your project plan and you take the time to sit down with these people and say, what is it that you can and will do? And what resources are you bringing to the table?
There it is, right. Okay.
And all of this definitely does take time. So Shayla has a poll question for
I
us.
think Ms. Dawn may want to speak.
Oh, Ms. Dawn?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was driving and I couldn't get it off of mute. But
okay.
But I was thinking about what you were saying and our customers. So in my particular position, my customers are community members and community neighborhoods and the like. So I got a question though, because we are labeled as an underserved community where I live. Although some of us don't think about that, but to me, sometimes that can help us. You know, with being an underserved community, with getting certain grants, you know, to work within the community. What you think about that? That we are labeled.
Yeah, I think underserved makes more sense than what they used to call the disadvantaged. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because underserved says we're not getting the same services that everybody else, that other groups are getting, or we have not gotten those services over the last 150, 200 years. And so the concept of being underserved is if and when, again, this justice piece changes and we get some of the same services. And as Ms. Cynthia said, we are allowed to manage these services. And as Mr. Otis said, we are capable of managing these services because we are closest to the customers.
Right.
We are the customers. And,
and
so that really makes a stronger case than we need because we are underserved. And I mean, every community we can show where most of our communities have not gotten the same services that others have gotten, or the community was cut in half with a freeway or whatever it is. But we have to understand that customer and that community and not merely just, this is for kids. Okay, that's fine. But what is different? Not what's wrong with these kids. What is different about the resources and the opportunities that they have had? And so this way of thinking about this is very different. You all think like that, but I'm not sure if when you approach your projects, you actually write it up like this. I don't know, you know, but I think this is
my question.
Yeah, because our minds still go back to kind of that old poor them. And I think that's why Diaper Bank took the baby off of our, you know, because it was kind of like, oh, and of course, some people were upset. You mean we're not going to have a baby? No, okay, we'll show some babies. But the idea of just to show this little star, it's just an image so that we don't go to the old poor, you know what I mean? Old poor, the poor folks. So this idea of what do you think makes a successful project? And you can't say money. Y'all like, well, because we know money makes a successful project, but what are some of the elements of what makes it? And since there's just a few of us, so why don't you just talk or put it in the chat? What makes a successful project?
What makes us successful is that we're advocates for what we believe in. and we are passionate about the work that we do.
Okay, so passion and advocacy.
Yes.
Okay, anybody else?
Ruda previously put in the chat that he's
Okay.
thinking about the section 1 and 3 and how to do that. I'm pretty sure more successfully, quote unquote,
Mhm.
to get to the outcome. So I think that is
Step 3 is step 1. Okay.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And then also collaboration is in the chat for a successful project. I mean,
Okay.
can I say it? Funding? Like, I mean,
No. We know that. We know that. We know that. But the idea of and collaboration is, again, strategic collaboration.
Mhm.
Again, I can remember running around saying we can get a letter from so and so. We really had no plan for how we were going to work with them. Well, if we get the grant, we'll call you and we'll put something together. That does. And the other collaboration is, believe it or not, it's within your organization. Because often if a program or a project is funded by this funder, we're doing it this way. And then another one is funded by another funder, and we're doing it this way. And they never connect. So what we're missing out on is that internal collaboration that leads to the accomplishment of the mission of the whole organization, because we operate in grant silos often in groups, because this grantor is asking for this grantor is asking for that, and they never come together, if you will, around the entire organization. So there is some internal work within the organization and or within the community that has to go on, as well as with the external collaboration. Anything else that makes a successful project? Well, I'm going to say a plan. Ta-da! So let's take a look at yeah, that was like sneaky way of getting up on it. Let's take a look at the difference in a program and a project. And you still like, wait a minute, we use these terms interchangeably. They are different. They really are. And the idea is that programs are long-term and projects are time-bound. And often, as you all know, the time is set by the grantor. It's a 1-year program. It's, you can apply for another year or that kind of thing. A program consists of interconnected projects. And then on a project, you got this long-term objective for these different programs. And so the idea of the project is being measured in cost effectiveness, quality, deadlines, and customer satisfaction. You see the difference in the program in terms of the needs and benefits that the program was connected. And don't forget that one of your customers is the grantor. One of your, and you may not want to think about them like that, but they are. And the deadlines, these deadlines are so important. And we're going to talk a little bit about compliance. And the deadlines don't make sense to us. Let's just put that out on the table. The deadlines don't make any sense to most of us, most of you who are doing this work. You're like, well, why do they have to have it like this? Well, I don't know, but we have to do it, and a program management is focused on context. Project management is focused on content. So it's almost like an internal, external thing. And we're not going to get hung up in this, but I just wanted you to kind of see, kind of the difference in this. The things that we're talking about today, you may not use many of the tools that we show you, but if we can just reorder our thinking so that we can all think like Chandra when we're doing this work. We may not use some of these terms, but it's a way of thinking about things that will help us to be, I think, more efficient as well as more effective. So let's keep going. So when we talk about, again, looking at the project, it's a series of tasks. We got to do this. We got to do this. It's steps, usually on a repetitive, continuous basis. We do the same thing in a project. We have the classes. We collect the food. We take the surveys. We do, all types of things. And then let's go to the next one. Let's look more at the project. The project, it has a predetermined timeline. It has a beginning and an end. And believe it or not, the end is the end of the grant cycle. It really is. Now, whether you say we're going to apply for it again or all that, but it ends when the grant cycle ends. Now, we can hope we can get it again, but it really needs, we need to have accomplished what we said we were going to accomplish in the time frame of the grant. It has a fixed budget. You know that. It has specific deliverables. What is it we said we were going to do? What is our product? Sometimes our product is knowledge is improved. What is the service? What are the results? And remember Drucker's definition of results: change lives and change conditions. And it has interrelated tasks. Again, that's the collaboration piece. And the main thing is that it involves people. It has to involve people. And it not only involves people as the end user, as the customer, but people providing input. One of the things, and I think it was Ms. Cynthia who said that has held all of our community development work back, is we didn't ask the people, we didn't ask the customer. We didn't ask the customer. I remember when people were putting in community gardens years ago, I call them helicopter volunteers. They come into neighborhoods that they had never been in before, plant a community garden. They didn't talk to anybody in the neighborhood. They didn't talk to the neighborhood association or anybody, plant the community garden, and then get upset because the community garden wasn't maintained. And the rumor was these people, and we know who they are, don't care, about gardens and all this kind. No, you did not involve the people. That is why it's so important. And I know you have requirements about your boards to have an end user on your board, to have community people on your board, to have a young person on your board. If your program has to do with young people, you say, can young people be on boards? Of course they can. But it definitely involves people. Often when and again, I've done it. We're filling out these forms, and now y'all are doing them online, filling them out. We have done nothing to ask folks what it is that you really need and how would it be delivered? What is the best way? And it is just so important. So I think we build into our timeline, and we're going to show you a Gantt chart. We build into our timelines this investigative stuff. I mean, you all are very familiar now with the way the notice of funds available come down. And so, if you're working with a certain customer group, do some work prior and figure out what you need to know, or do some research to take a look at what's already in the pipeline regarding the customers, regarding the neighborhood. These things, but to have it documented so that you can just drop it in to your project plan and into your grant proposal. And the documentation is really, really important. And, there are a lot of tools to use, and, we can use portals, you can use Dropbox, but it has to be information that other people have. So we talk about project management, the idea of strategic objectives, reliable processes, some things that we're going to do over and over again. Now, we're going to change it? Yes, because everything changes. So we get increased productivity if we know what we're going to do. We also improve collaboration. You say, well, it takes time to collaborate. We can do a whole session on collaboration. It does. But when we do not collaborate with others, it does not work, because you got people doing the same thing. You got people going for the same money. And instead of becoming collaborators, we're bidding against each other. We also always want to align our project goals and our organizational goals. Some of you, I don't know if you remember, many years ago, the Ryan White AIDS funding came down. And I saw organizations in Houston getting into AIDS work that wasn't their mission. The money came down fast. It was federal money. It came to the states. It needed to be spent right away. It was unbelievable how people jumped in that. It was so short term. As far as I'm concerned, most of that money went down the drain, because the organizations, some of them that applied for it, it had nothing to do with their organization goals. It was, it just did not. And yes, it is hard to look away, if you will, but it didn't do anything. We also are better able to manage and allocate our resources. You know what the most important resource is? Time and people. Is we only have so much time, and we only have so many people. Most of you do not have a project management team. Now, basic project management calls for a team. Somebody sitting there going, I'm the team. And I get that, but you got to get some other people involved in this. And you keep working to get people involved. And so this stronger culture of teamwork, because we have to have a project team. And then the idea of increased visibility. How many of you feel like nobody knows what we do? Nobody talks about what we're doing. You know, here we are doing all this good stuff over here and nobody knows about it. Well, if we are really have a great external communication plan with our projects, they will know. And then the other thing about the goal, having a goal and working on project management is reducing risk and setbacks. There are risks to everything we do. If somebody right now texts you and said, I'm gonna give you $1 million for your organization, there's a risk to that. You're like, well, I won't think about that till after I get the money. But there is a risk to taking, you know, to getting to anything. There's risk and there's rewards. And I really think it's important to sit down and talk. And if it's just you doing it, go through the pros and the cons. If we have this project, what are we going to do with what we're doing over here? I used to work with and for somebody who never met an idea they didn't like. They will not be named. I can't tell you how many projects we had. Never saying we're going to take this off of the plate or this is going to be midterm or long term. The plate just kept getting, it just kept piling. And what we were doing was it was scattered. It was so scattered. We weren't really managing projects. We were just like pedaling a bicycle, trying to keep going. So the idea is, what are the risks? I remember early in technology, there was a grant that came in the organization that I was working for in Houston. We didn't have, somebody ran out in midday trying to buy a program to put in on everybody's computer, because this grant required, it was one of the early grants that you required that you do documentation. She got a story.
No, wasn't it a fax machine? I've heard this story before.
Oh, there was a fax machine way on back. Yeah, Target had some grants for community organizations, and it was, the guy from Target was there, and he was meeting, and it was, at that time, I thought it was an old lady. She's probably my age. She probably wasn't all that old. And she was part of some community organization. And he was saying, and just fax us your, and they had a very simple request. Basically, they were going to give everybody the money. It was like $1,000 or something. And the lady raised her hand and she said, what if you don't have a fax machine? Well, Mr. Target couldn't imagine that there would be, that they wouldn't have a fax machine. And then he went, oh, well, you can bring it in or you can mail it in. And I love, again, getting old gives you so much liberty. And she said, well, you should have said that. And so I thought, well, she's going to get her $1,000, so the idea of, are we really prepared to do this work? Because I will tell you this, there are some grants, the requirements, it's impossible. You don't have the bandwidth to do it. And it's okay to say that, rather than to get in say, you know what, we're not going for this time. What we're going to do is try to build up our capacity over here. So maybe when the next time this comes around, or the next time it comes around, we can do that. Because if we do not have the capacity to compliance with everything that they are asking us, it's a lost leader, because we'll probably never get funded again. And so that's why we really have to look at the risk, and we have to look at the possibilities. And so we build in, one of the things that most of us like to do is we build too much into our projects. We're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do it. Because why? Because we know it would change things. But we really need to be more strategic when we're working on our project plan, and not put everything in there. Because we're not, you know why? Because we're dealing with people. If you're dealing with droids, everybody would do everything. We're going to have 7 meetings. Good luck with that. We're going to have 7 trainings. How's that working for you? Why don't we do 5? Why don't we do 4? It don't have to be 7. So the idea of being realistic about our project. And if you go over, yay. But we should not promise in our projects things that, that we can't do. Or, your customers, that there are certain things, how difficult it can be to get people together, how difficult it can get to get things going. And things, when this money comes down, I will say this, it always comes down almost after the fact. We got one grant and all the money had to be spent in like 45 days. It was like, well, that's ridiculous. So what do you do? So this idea of risk and setback. So let's keep going.
Miss
So when we
Cynthia
talk
has a
about,
question.
okay,
Excuse me, I did it,
You're
but
fine.
something said, no, just that quick. I should have written it down. I've forgotten. It was something that you said, and I totally slipped my mind. If it comes back, I'll come back to you. But I think one of the things was one other thing is time. I'm sorry. Here it is. Why do we find that if, as you said, they say, okay, how many activities you may have? Oh, we're going to have 20. And I think we do that because it makes it look good that you're going to be doing so much. And in reality, you're not sitting back and thinking, if this is a 5-week program, I'm going to do 20. I'm just using it. 20 activities. And what are the activities going to be? Who will it involve? How long will it take? And
Right.
then
And how
you
will we
don't meet
get them there? How
right
will we reach out to them?
communication, getting everybody, and then you don't meet your goal, and then you
Right.
say, "Oh my God, now what am I going to do?" So I think if we
Exactly.
just it, I think it always looks good on paper. The more you put, but if you can't meet the goal, then you're defeating your purpose. So why not put, okay, we're going to do 2 or 3, and it might be 3 big activities that would take care of all of it instead of saying, oh, well, we're going to do 20. And then you might have 2 people at each meeting. So what's the purpose? You're not meeting the people, you're
Well,
not meeting your goal, and you're not reaching the person, your people that you need to have.
right. And the other thing is, I know that a lot of grantors want to know the how many, how much, how often. I know that that is important, but the outcomes, if you have,
Right.
like you said, 3 big projects, and when I say big projects or big strategies, doesn't mean events, and we'll get into that, whatever it is, where you are going back to Drucker's questions, where you can articulate what the outcomes, what the results are going to be. The results are the big thing, not merely how many, how much, how often. And
Correct.
the grantors are being called on this stuff now, saying, look, and again, I think state, parish, and federal money will be the last group to come out of this. But in philanthropy now, specifically foundations and corporations, they are being taught, they've been told, it's not how many, how much. You can grow wide or you can grow deep. And growing deep, and that's what project management and program management, it helps you to go deeper. Just as you were saying, we're not going to do 20, but we're going to do 3 things that are really going to have long-lasting results on our customers, which will then impact our community. See, you have to stretch it out. You have to stretch it out to show people the impact on the community. Again, I'm sitting here in Memphis, and we have 2 things that are coming close to us. The Blue Oval, which is going to be a crazy big thing that Ford is doing about 40, 50 miles up the road. It's going to be huge. They're going to be paying $25, $30 an hour. And now Elon Musk is talking about coming here. You know what? We don't have the workforce. You know why? Because we haven't invested in education. So to be able to show the connection between what we do in schools and what we do in education to the Blue Oval and to the community, you know what I'm saying? To people making money versus we got to help kids learn how to read. Yes. So what? That's what I like to play, is the so what game. We got to help kids learn how to read. So what? So they graduate from high school. So what? So they can get, so that they can learn, and then they can go into, technical or go into college. So what? So that we have an educated community. So what? So that we have taxes and business resources that keep this town afloat. You got to drag it all the way out. You
Mr.
have to
Otis
drag.
Tucker has a question.
Yeah, Mr. Otis.
Ms. Clark, I just want to piggyback on Ms. Cynthia relative to the 20 objectives or project objectives or initiative. Is there a method that is less subjective relative to maybe the size of your board or committee or community engagement, where you would say, hey, I got 2 folks that can work on this initiative, 2 to this initiative. Is there a more uh like quantitative method? Because I serve on some boards that are very functional and well versed, and there's a length of professionals, and and project managers, but then there's other boards that are just made up of different community members, and there's a lot of back and forth and subjectivity, and then you don't want to go too deep into debate and argumentative on objectives, so you let things fly. And I'm sitting on this call in this learning session, and I know better, but then I get drowned out, and I'm like, all right, now we're off to 20, and I know that's not the way. Sandra, you know what I'm talking about.
Every
And Miss
day.
Sandy,
I think morbidly, some of this I feel like is an age progression. Realistically, there will be aging periods where people will no longer be able to do what they're doing, and the old guard is forced to change. I'm with the mindset that people are working. I'm having a family reunion. Hopefully none of my family members hear this, but we're in a committee. Then we have a subcommittee that we call it, we're working in the shadows. They were actually doing the planning. So when and if the system has a shift or change and that we're ready to take on, I just found out on Sunday, apparently we have to find the whole venue and everything in a month. So but I pre-planned, scouted out, asked people previously so that we were able to book it yesterday, and I found out on Sunday. So I need a better terminology for workforce shadow planning and also coalition building with those that really sometimes you find yourself aligning with work that may not be directly your board work, but somehow it turns to come back around. And when they're trying to pull in your agency or your entity, that you can have a plan or a subset of a plan, because a lot of the state boards, and we have a whole new governor and new changes, similar to when we previously had a governor that implemented all of these state regulations on boards to be submitted on paper. I feel like that's, again, some tightening of the reins, for lack of better terms, happening now. So the sad part is that some people may lose their funding, lose the support. Your competition is really your coalition is your strength, but we're all doing this competitive model, going after the same amount of dollars. So like Ms. Vicki Clark said, you almost have to rally your competition to your coalition even more. And those people that are doing that shadow work are not the executives in the position, because there's so many things coming down the pipeline that will be not in their control.
Well, and Chandra, I really appreciate what you said, and you were very diplomatic about aging. We have 5 generations in play now. The World War II generation, which we've all just celebrated, because of the anniversary of D-Day, the boomers, hello, the Xers, the Ys, and the Zs. And part of community building is respecting everybody in the community. And I know as a boomer, it's hard for us to respect somebody who could be our grandchild. But we really need to come to this with the future of this community, the future of this organization is in the hands of the Zs. And we have as much to learn from them as they have to learn from us. This is a respect issue. And so that's why I was talking about internal collaborations. You may have been on, I may have been on the neighborhood association or whatever for 30 years. Okay. But someone who is a Z, who is in their 20s, they're looking at this neighborhood in a whole different way than I'm looking at it, because I moved here when I was 10 years old. And it doesn't mean that I'm looking at it wrong, but I got to be open to other people. And this is why so many young people are saying, I don't want to get involved in community stuff, because all I'm going to do is end up arguing with a bunch of old people. And, and it really, this is some of this internal work, and talking about boards, and in your requirements, it talks about board member requirements, and it talks about board training. And whether you want to call it board training or board education, and I think we have done, or we can do a thing for boards with you all on the board building cycle. If I can't participate in these trainings or these orientations, technically I can't be on your board, because governance is so different now. And a lot of what you are required to report on has to do with your board. So the idea of people just getting on a board for their name, or just getting on a board because they've been on there and us not doing our due diligence from a governance standpoint, that's not going to work, because as Chandra said, you're either not going to get the money or you're not going to keep the money. And so the board has to really understand what their role is. If I don't have the time and the energy to be on your board, then I can be an advisor. But to actually be a governor, which means that legally on the bottom of the tax form is my name. These are the things I have to do. And most of these things are, the ethics training, the confidentiality, the financial disclosure, all of these things, and the training on board governance and all that. Well, we can't get anybody to come to training. Then we need to get some more board members. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But we also need to lay out our board development, and this is part of our project plan, is by the year. So when are we going to have the board retreat? I don't know. Chayla will be the president next year. Let her figure it out. No. We always have the board retreat the third Saturday in May. I don't care who the president is. So we have a board calendar. And so we're flipping the switch on some of these things, and governance has to be included in your project plan. Because I look at strategic plans all the time. I don't see anything about the board in the strategic plan. It's all about program and project. And technically the board's work contributes heavily to the projects and the programs. So,
Ms. Clark,
this is, yeah. Mm-hmm.
How would you approach appointed individuals who may have been appointed by a body or elected official? And I think some of those people are serving because they were asked, not because they had interest. And I think it's a responsibility of the individual appointed and the appointed agency or official to make sure that we having the people who are going to do the work on the board. And then
I agree.
We have issues sometimes with quorum, which is like that is the most mundane, like why we can't get quorum.
First of all,
so how do we approach those members? Where we're asking them, hey, do you really want to serve, and would you like for me to speak to maybe Senator X or Representative Y and say, hey, look, I really think I talked to Mr. Johnson or Miss Jane and say they're only doing this because they don't want to tell you no. And here's a few other choices that will be willing to serve. Like, how do you have that conversation?
Well, I appreciate
this is Dawn. Can I piggyback
Hey,
off of what Otis just said? Because a lot of time, well, in my case, you have members that are elected to the executive board, and as time goes on, they're not really fulfilling, any duty. So how do you handle that? Because they're elected.
Yeah.
So
this whole idea
elect them,
this whole idea of appointed people and elected people, first of all, we have to do our work to make sure that they have good role portraits. And you can call them job descriptions. Now we call them role portraits because it's not really a job. But for a lot of these people, it is part of their job. They feel like it's part of their job. But have we actually said, this is what they need to do? This is what they need to do, not just they need to attend 6 meetings. This is what it looks like. And here's the type person we're looking for. We got to be, so if we think of this as a project, how do we manage this idea of having people who are appointed, anointed, and y'all know some people get anointed, appointed, anointed, or elected people on our boards who they didn't choose it. They were chosen, or they were voluntold, if you will. And then the organization or the agency or the senator or whoever, I think they should also sign an agreement that the person, will do this. I mean, again, it's not just, okay, we need somebody to be on our board because it says that in our, in our framework, or it says that in the grant, and they just send somebody over there and they don't know, the person didn't go through onboarding. We haven't gotten to know the person. We just take whoever they send, but we didn't say what we needed. You notice I didn't say who we needed, it's what we needed. And so I think it was Mr. Otis who was saying, I like the idea of having conversations up front. Most of these people don't know. They get someone on the phone. Oh, okay, they need the New Orleans Business Alliance need a board member. Okay, Taylor, you got any time? I have actually had that happen to me. Somebody said, go to a meeting over at United Way. I ended up on a committee. I was like, what? you know, and so the idea of really being, again, strategic about how we ask, what we ask, and how much information we provide to the group. Shayla?
I was asked by a friend to be on her board, and it's state board. And it was for something that I'm very interested in, and another nod to Immigrant Heritage Month. It was about immigration, and specifically in the state of Pennsylvania. And of course, I was like, oh, yes, I would be very interested in serving on your board. And of course, because this is our business, I was like, Vicki, like, this is my friend. Can you please like just prep me on what I should ask? And we did like a quick kind of overview on what they had outward facing on their websites and any newsletters that might be floating around on the internet. And so I kind of had some questions about like, well, you don't really have an executive director, like you're in a search right now, how's that going? Financials and different things. And so like I had these questions even in my head that I was going to ask, even though this was my friend. And when I finally met with my friend, I said, well, tell me about this board. And she said, and I quote, she's like, I'm the treasurer, but I don't even know what I'm doing. Immediate red flag. So like they don't have the infrastructure. They're a very young organization, and they still don't have like the knowledge to know what they don't know. So I respectfully declined, and I don't feel bad about it.
And when you're working, and I appreciate that story, and I know that the anointed and the appointed and the elected people, they come in a different way because, again, you're kind of stuck with them, if you will. And I don't mean that they're not good people, but I think we don't onboard them in a proper way. I think we don't tell whoever is anointing or appointing or elected them what we really need and why we need it. So we need to have conversations with those agencies or with those senators or with the city council or whoever it is to be able to say, this is what we need and this is why. We don't just need somebody to come to a meeting once every other month or once every month, or we need them to come because we can't get quorum. No, this is really what we need. And again, going with Mr. Otis is we need to have some conversations, and we check in every year. We check in with the board member, and we check in with the agency or the group that, you know, that anoints or appoints. And that is a sticky wicket.
Yeah.
It is. Anointing
Yeah.
and appointing is a real sticky wicket. It really is. Because I think if people understood that it is not their agency that is responsible, it's the person. At the bottom of that 990 is the name of the person. It is not the name of
their personal financial.
Exactly.
Their confidentiality. They are
Yes, ma'am.
at risk of an ethics violation.
Yes.
It's not the appointed authority or the organization.
No.
Yes.
And I think even the appointed authorities may not get that. So I really, people need to understand that this is personal. This is a personal responsibility. Now, it may be part of their job, but this is a personal responsibility as far as governments, all of them, is concerned. So this idea of you got to get it done. You got to work it within the budget. You got to get it done on time. And it has to be done to satisfaction. And really, it needs to move to a level of excellence. Again, I really want, when project management, if you don't hear anything else, is you can grow wide or you can grow deep. And growing deep is so important. That's in the knowledge. And that's so you're doing, it will seem like you're doing less in terms of the how many, how often, how much, but it's going so much deeper, which means, going back to Dr. Drucker's work, you're going to have better results. You're going to have longer lasting results. We have all thrown projects and programs together. Yes, it's a testimony right here. I have done it at the last minute, and it was a disaster. I can tell you that. So this idea of we have to get it completed, and we can go back in. Sometimes you can renegotiate, but many times you can't. So you have to change something inside. I had a youth program in Houston for young people to volunteer who wanted to learn about medical careers. And this was during the days of when somebody had to come in the morning and take the messages off the answer machine, and they fill out all the little pink things. Y'all like, how old is this woman? And so the idea of it was, so I was working regular hours, 8:30 to 4:30 or whatever it was. All I was getting was a bunch of pink slips in the morning. Called this before people had cell phones and all that. Where are kids in the daytime? They're 16 to 21. They were at school or they were at work. So we were missing each other. My numbers were horrible. I wasn't getting the amount of kids. We had all these programs, amazing program, and we didn't have enough kids. Now, thank goodness I had a decent executive director. And she said, I think, see, we didn't know that we didn't plan for that customer. We didn't plan for that customer because they were 16 to 21. She said to me, how would you feel about working different hours? I'm like, okay. So you mean I don't have to be in rush hour in Houston? She was like, no, you don't have to be in rush hour in Houston. And you can work half day on Friday and you work half day on Saturday. Sometimes we write projects and we have plans and something has to change inside. And believe it or not, at that point, some board member, and this is when boards were in the weeds, and y'all know how I feel about boards being in the weeds, some board member said, well, who's going to supervise her? First of all, that ain't their business. They don't, it's the executive director or the CEOs that she manages us. Who's going to supervise her? She said, I'm not watching people. They know what they're doing. So the idea is we had to change something. So when you're looking at a project, what has to change inside? And if you are unable to change that, then don't go for it because it's not going to work. So I started working different hours, later hours, and then on Saturday. And somebody said, Ms. Ruta said, yep, I remember that. A hand crank, yes. So the idea was, and then half day on Saturday. The program continued. It was all about understanding that customer and making internal adjustments to be able to reach that customer. And for some people, for some organizations, we go for projects where we need to make changes, but the internal structure will not allow us to make those changes. Then we need to not go for the project. I'm sorry. Let's keep going. It was nice not to be in rush hour in Houston, though. So let's take a look at this idea, complexity. And we've talked about that. Some of the requirements and some of the projects, it's just too complex. We don't have the resources. We don't have the people. We don't have the time. Then what is the critical nature? And we've talked about this, the critical nature of what difference is this project going to make? And that's why I said spread it all the way out. There used to be a time when, I keep talking about old people, I'm really talking about myself now, when senior citizens would not vote for school bond issues because they said things like, well, my kids are out of school. I don't need to do that. It don't have nothing to do with me. When they started connecting school bond issues to property values, senior citizens went crazy, saying, oh yeah, we need better schools. But you have to show people how critical it is. Do not assume that they know what you know about issues. And you notice I'm talking about issues. I'm not talking about programs. What is the issue and how critical is this issue to us having a healthy community? And then compliance. Let's take a look at some of your requirements. We talked a little bit about these because I've got a copy of it.
Can I do a quick check-in of the group? We have a break scheduled. Do we want to do like a 10-minute break or 5-minute break just before we get into compliance?
Or do we want to keep going?
Yeah, we can keep going if everyone's fine with it, but this will take us to the end of the hour.
I think we're
I'm
good.
good to keep going.
All right, we're gonna keep going.
Thank you. Thank you all for hanging in there. Okay, before we go to compliance, let's talk about culture because we'll come back. Back it up. This is why I don't touch anything. What's the culture of your organization? You said, what does that mean? We didn't have time to show you. The culture of the organization is how does it work? Not how it looks on paper, not how it looks on your website. Do we really work together? Is it a competitive culture? Is it what is the culture? And sometimes for the project, the culture needs to shift. In fact, most of our organizations, the culture needs to shift. It either needs to be more welcoming. It needs to we don't need to have cliques. We don't need to have, these are the people who always say stuff and these other people are disenfranchised, and these are the people who are in charge. So it is really important. And we do a lot of work on culture and organizational culture. And, I would love, Chandra, for us to do some of that. So it takes a long time to shift culture, but it's worth it. It is totally worth it. The other board that I'm on now is Youth Volunteer Corps. And we never had a young person on the board. Duh. So when we got a young person on the board, we had changed things. First of all, it was a budget implication. It's a national organization. You got to pay for a teenager and his mama or her mama or daddy or somebody to come to the meeting. This is a national organization. Guess what? We need to change the meetings so that the person doesn't have to miss so much school. Oh, okay. But so that's a culture shift. And this person is a full board member. We don't put a bow on their head, pat them and sit in the corner and say, you just a kid. So it it changed the whole culture of the board. And we have they change out every 2 years, and we have learned so much. We have learned so much. We're like, well, kids don't want to do that. Oh. So this idea of culture, and this is, these, you've seen these, and trying to put these together. Again, your official minutes, there are structures for how your minutes can be done. Again, it's not 98 anymore. The idea of just using a format, and we can put something in there. We hadn't put it in there, but just a minutes, a template for you to be able to put things in, and these approval and things have to be uploaded. And who has to do this? It may not be the ED. You all have to decide, and let's not go on title. Let's go, who's the best person to do this? Who is the best person? And your meeting notices and all of these things, it is really, really important. And as you all know, it's hard to get people together. We get so many emails, we get so many messages. So the idea of, that's why setting this calendar out for the year, then you don't have these issues. And then financial statements, again, this is a non-negotiable. All of these are non-negotiable. This is compliance. And once you look at this and say, okay, who's going to do this? How's it going to do it? And then let's back it out. Back it out, saying, if we're going to do this by this date, then we need this report by then. And then your quarterly reports. I don't know, each grant, each funder has a different quarterly report form. But again, some of that stuff is just plug and play and drop in. But it really goes down to, how do we plan for this? How do we plan for it? Not, oh my gosh, this is due tomorrow. How do we plan for it? And that's a process calendar that we work on. And then you've got your quarterly filings that come up. Scroll up, Taylor. And then, of course, we have the board member requirements. And these are so critical. And again, we'd love to do some governance work with you all on this, because it's just really, it's really important. And then your, and what do your quarterly reports look like? We can't start collecting information for the quarterly report today and it's due tomorrow. It does not work. So this is a lot of compliance. And you may have more things that you have to comply to, but Chandra put this together. Dates applicable. Yeah. And templates. And again, we can get you some templates for like meeting notices and things like that. So that it's, so that it's easy. Let's make it easy to do. Anybody else want to talk about compliance? Or we just don't want to talk about compliance?
I will, because that also sometimes renders boards, and also if you're not compliant for grants, ineligible for funding, ineligible if you need to go out for an extension. If you don't submit within a certain time period and report back, then you may not be able to get that. And then you're also kind of marked, but not marked within that philanthropic or that grant world of not being compliant. And then if it's a smaller space and sector, people may then say, well, they don't submit their stuff in time, they're difficult to work with, et cetera. And those rumor mills continue to plague your structure, your organization, and your work. And for state board specifically, it is a none, even if there's a hurricane. I know people were applying for some Superfund site dollars during Hurricane Zeta, and I think there were applications and money for it before that, but then there was a whole hurricane and no one had power, no one had anything, and they had to input it in advance or literally drive out to another state to finish the application because it was due that day. So we also have to understand that the structure that we have, doing it earlier and submitting it and then go back and rechecking it, especially if you're going to SAMS.gov, which is a federal site, grants.gov, is really important, especially when our infrastructure is sometimes not stable enough to submit your grants and your things on time, and then just willfully not uploading. That all makes you a non-compliant board, not uploading your agenda within certain business days, not uploading your meeting minutes. And just for that small, tiny infraction, you now get a letter from the legislative auditor's office or from another entity at the state, or you get a kickback from the grant saying, oh, this closed at 11:59 p.m. the day before, and you submitted the day after. So knowing those dates definitively is very key as well, because it can affect your livelihood or your organization's existence.
Yeah, it really does. And I know it may seem small, but again, when you're working with stakeholders, whether it's state, federal, whatever it is, they run it. I hate to say this, well, what is this about the meeting minute? This is why governance is so important. And the last of the C's is compassion. Most people have compassion. They would not be working with you or volunteering with you if they did not have compassion for the community. But it takes all of these. And again, the compliance, and we're going to keep moving because I want to get to the calendars and that. So let's keep going. Let's go back to the project manager. What's the strategy? What are we trying to do? And how are we going to do it? The idea of we need to have, what's the structure? What structure will support this? What structure? Well, we don't have a structure that supports this. Shayla, can you catch up? So we don't have a structure that supports this. How are we going to do this? And then what systems do we have and what systems do we need? And what staff do we have? And staff can be paid and or volunteer, and that includes your board and all of that. What do we have? And then the skills, what tools do we have, and what information? Do we have someone who really understands this customer group? Do we have access to this customer group? What do we need? This is knowledge, skills. And then we talked about how do we work, the style and the culture. If we're kind of laissez-faire, we lay back and we're going to get a grant that, as Chandra said, even in a hurricane, you got to put that in on that day. You driving, across the state line trying to get to, get to East Texas to try to get a grant application in, then this isn't going to work for you because your culture doesn't work. And then these stakeholders, who has an interest or who should have an interest in the project process or the outcome? Often people don't know. We have started with the diaper bank and the period supplies, a whole group of men. There is a sports guy, I don't know him, Bomani Jones, and he got all interested in diaper need, poverty issues, and period supplies. And so through his social media, he has been talking about this in a way that is drawing men to these issues. So it's not always the same stakeholders. We have to really think about who should be and who could be interested. And let's not just keep rounding up the usual suspects, because we love to do that. And who could be or who should be interested. There's a young man who started an entire project to get the changing trays in men's restrooms, because there were no changing trays for babies in men's restrooms. Because that's, again, society said the mama was supposed to do that. And he was like, how are we going to be full functioning fathers and, and male caregivers if there's no changing tables? And, he had a picture of him laying his shirt out on the floor to try to change his baby because they didn't have any changing tables. So you wouldn't ordinarily think of these issues as issues that males would be interested in, but we have to reach out to different stakeholders and help them to understand how our project impacts their lives. So this concept of stakeholders, we usually just round up the usual suspects, and that's because it's easy, because we know who they are. But often there's other people who really should be very, very, like, again, senior citizens in education, There's so many, like, well, what does that have to do with? Well, there's a reason. So, if we want to do this all day, we're not. The idea of who are your stakeholders now and who should be your stakeholders and how do you access them? And this is not who do you know? Because when we just go with who do we know when we work on a project, we just keep talking to the same people. So let's keep going. So I know you may not have a project team, but you kind of have to think about it as a team. The sponsor or the funder, they are the ones who they identify the constraints. Hopefully they inspire you. Then most of you probably operate like a project manager. That thinking is project manager, which Chandra talked about. Okay, how do I get this going? How do I organize this? That's a project manager mentality. And then the stakeholders, again, they provide feedback. These are your partners, other people in the community, other organizations, it could be other government entities. And there has to be somebody who is a subject matter expert. I went to a event this past weekend for a group here in Memphis called Just City. And they are working on criminal justice reform, which is very difficult right now in Memphis because we got a lot of crime. So it's not a real popular thing. But so many people in Memphis, in Shelby County, are in jail because they just don't have bond money. I'm not talking about people who've done violent crime. I'm talking about driver's license stuff and all those kind of things, and they don't have bail money. And so this idea of having a subject matter expert. So yes, they have a formerly incarcerated person on their board who actually spent time at 201 Poplar. Now, he or she cannot speak for everyone, but they know what it's like. So the idea of, who knows as much about this. And then we talked about who the customer is, and the customer has to influence the course. Again, I gave you the example of them changing my hours because the customer was young people. And so the course changed because they weren't available. And then the supplier, and you probably have a lot of suppliers, but a lot of your suppliers are also your partners who you partner with to put meetings together or activities together or events together. What materials, your trainers, your consultants, what is it that you need? So this is what a team looks like. Now, somebody's sitting there going, that's all me. Yes, but I would encourage you to try to get other people involved. And when they are involved in this project. We don't have to put them on the board. They can be involved in this project. So you can have a project advisory group and they don't advise, they just a project working group. Let me change that. A project working group. And they don't have to be on the board because the board should be working on governance. But your project working group are the people who are actually doing this. And whether they're paid or volunteer, the idea that they are the ones who can take on some of these roles. Let's keep going. We want to get to the life cycle. We need more time. So this idea of having a project plan, I love this. A goal without a plan is just a wish. I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna get my closets clean. I got a wish that there's a commercial where the lady points and all her junk disappears. Something like 1-800-JUNK. That's kind of where I am with getting the closets cleaned out because I ain't got no plan. But the idea is, what's the scope? And you talked about that earlier. How big should this be? How deep should this be? And why? The most important thing is why. Why are we having 3 versus 20? Why are we choosing these topics? Why are we choosing these areas? We talked about the risk. Let's be honest about the resources that we have. What people, other money, availability of time, places. Let's really look at, but all of this has to go in a plan. And then what are our metrics for success? Our key performance indicators. And they have to be bigger than how many, how much, how often. How do we know that we're being successful? You say, well, how will we know that? Because we build in evaluation pieces, and some easy things to build in is a before and after. We talked about food and healthy food on a scale of 1 to 5 before I, got this flyer or took this course or, got this information. I knew 2 about healthy eating. Now I know 4. I'm not trying to make this hard for you. I'm trying to put in, evaluation is a whole topic in itself, but you have to put those metrics in. And then how do we achieve those? And then what is the schedule? And the schedule has to line up with the funder, unfortunately. And often it is not your fiscal year. it's their grant year. And it is really frustrating to be in an organization that has multiple funders and they got all different years, but that's just the reality. So that's why each project has its own schedule. And then who are we talking to? Why are we talking to them? And the biggest thing in communication is who are we not talking to? And I loved what Mr. Otis said. What is, we need to talk to the people who are sending us these board members. Yes, we do. And we need to talk to them up front about what's expected versus after there's a problem. So the project plan has to include all of this. Now you say, well, the grant application don't ask us all this. No, but your plan should include all of this. Let's keep going. Oh, you have to really think about it. You're like, oh gosh, we got to do another plan. These are things to think about. Again, I'm not asking you to do these things in whole cloth. A project charter, we just talked about that. What we just outlined is a plan, the charter. What's the big piece? That's like the vision for it. We talked about the plan. Then let's break this down in a task list. It's very interesting to look at task lists. Somebody says, okay, let's scramble eggs. So what do? First of all, we got to buy eggs. Second of all, I went to a conference once and they were teaching us about tasks, and we had I won't use eggs because I don't cook. The idea was to come in the next morning in the conference and talk about and have written down, how did we get down to the meeting room the next day? So most of us wrote down, we took the elevator. And she said, how did you get on the elevator? Well, we walked down the hall. Well, how did you get in the hall? We opened the door to our hotel room. And we got it. The idea of, she wanted us to get so granular as to say, I opened my eyes. I sat up in bed. I put my legs on the floor. I stood up. I went into the bathroom. I brushed my teeth. I put my toothbrush back. I know this sounds crazy, but this is the way you outline tasks, because there's always more in it than we think. Some of us had mothers who every time they got ready to cook, they had to send somebody to the stove because they didn't have everything they need. So the idea of breaking these tasks down very individually, and we talked about budget, and the budget has to be real. The budget has to be real. And I don't know, some grantors allow you to include volunteer time as a match, and the value of a volunteer hour, and Shelley, if you look that up for us, is very high. If you don't have the match, but there has to be a budget, and it has to include, and I'm not going to call it overhead, I'm talking about it has to include salaries, or it has to include an allocation of funds for people, for resources. Volunteers are not free. Training is not free. And just to put it into somebody's job and say, okay, you're going to do 10% of this and 10% of that, come on. And then we talked about communication, and then a status report. How are we doing? And what's coming up, and what are our challenges? If we could do all of this prior to, and then as we keep working through it, this is the type of thing that make meetings more exciting, because we're actually working on these things. Like I said, I don't think this is necessarily board work. I think this is a project committee work, and people on the project committee can be some board members, but they can be other people too. So I really encourage you to, every time you go for a project, have a project committee. And these are the folks who really want to do the work.
The national average for a volunteer hour is $33.49.
$33.49. So if you can use match, you can use volunteer hours, you can multiply all your volunteer hours by $33.49, and then you can, have some match for that. If you're using match from other programs, be sure that you are not using restricted funds. You cannot use restricted funds from another program to go into another project. Does not work. You could go to jail. Somebody could go to jail because it's not allowed. So let's look at the life cycle quickly. Projects are alive. Organizations are alive. And if we think of them as living versus it's on paper. And so let's look at the first phase is initiation. And this is where we define it. We talked about that. What are we doing? And why are we doing it? I think we miss the why. We always talk about what we're going to do, but we do not talk about why, the long-term impact of why. And then this gaining approval, that means we're getting our funding or we're getting our resources. So this is, and do we always define projects after we know what money is coming down, or are there some things that we know that we want to do that we have on a, in waiting, hoping that money will come down, versus let's make this fit this funding opportunity? And we've all done that. But the idea of what projects do we really need? Let's go to phase 2. And we talked a lot about phase 2 is the plan, getting into the plan. We talked about that. So let's go to phase 3, project execution. How do we do this? How do we do this? This is the meat of the project. This is the time that takes all the time. How do we do this? How are we going to do this? And you notice it says the project team. So again, I really encourage you to put a project team together that's outside of the board. The board still has oversight, but the project team is doing the actual work on this. And constantly, what are the challenges? Sometimes we're afraid to talk about challenges because we think that people will think we're failing. Every project has challenges. Every project has challenges. And how are we handling those challenges? And going back to what I think it was Miss Cynthia said, this idea of building confidence and trust. Are we doing this in a way that our stakeholders and our customers and our community and our funders trust us? Going to what Chandra was saying, if we can't get the reports in on time, we don't trust you. And then the idea of confidence around what we're actually trying to do. It doesn't mean that we're not going to, goof up sometimes. And then we look at the project manager, and we talked about that. The what's next? Phase 4. The monitoring and control. We've talked about this. The idea of it has to be, but this is not over until the project is completely finished. But it has to be ongoing. We don't do this the day before the project and then we close it out. Yeah, and we're going to show you Smarty goals. Yeah, the idea of we close it out, and we close it out on a high note, rather than, oh my God, I'm so glad we're through with that. But we close it out on a high note. And what did we learn as an organization from this project? What did we learn? We learned that we can handle more than we thought. We learned that this was not a great idea. What did we learn? So let's keep going. We're going to get to the logic model, and I think we'll go into the Smarty goals after this. And we talked about this. This is the project manager responsibility. Do you have to do all of that? No, you have to oversee all of that. We are suggesting something called agile project management. You're like, really, lady? But it's the same thing we talked about: defining, analyzing, testing it, designing it. And it has a lot of demands for the end users. How are we talking to the people that we are planning these projects with? You notice I didn't say for, I said with. And are we really getting feedback and getting input from them? So let's keep going. And it's just called agile because we talk about little bitty things, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Of course, you have a lot of that to do. And responding to change over just the plan says we need to do this, even though this isn't working. And lots of documentation. It really is. This is the way this really works. So let's keep going. I don't know how many of you use logic models. When I first was introduced to logic models, they made my head swim. But if you start to use them, they really do work. So let's take a look at this about logic model, because it'll help you do all this planning that we've been talking about.
Hi, today I'm going to be talking about logic models. I'm going to share what the components of a logic model are and provide a little bit of guidance on how you can create one yourself. My name is Michelle Molina at Connecting Evidence, and before we jump right into logic models, I want to share a little bit of background on what a theory of change is. A theory of change is some sort of document that outlines how the things you do are connected to the changes you want to see. It could take many forms. It can be a narrative, a picture, and in this case, we're specifically talking about a logic model. And when you're developing a theory of change, the end product is often some sort of document. But the benefits of developing a theory of change are not necessarily that document, but the amount of thought and critical thinking it takes to really consider whether or not the activities you're planning are actually going to lead to the changes and the results you want to see. I made a summary of today's video that you can download in the description below. What are the 5 components of a logic model? We have an impact statement. There's also inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes. The first component I'm going to talk about is the impact statement. So an impact statement is a brief 3 to 4 sentences describing your work. And you might have heard 3 to 4 sentences and gotten a little scared, but I encourage you to push yourself to simplify your description as much as possible. I want you to ask yourself 4 questions. 1, what do you do? 2, who do you do it for? 3, how do you do it? And 4, why? So create a sentence for each of those questions, and there you have a very brief description of the work you do. And I want to challenge you not to get stuck wordsmithing. That's very easy to do, but remember that a theory of change and a logic model is a working document. The benefits of the document is the thought that goes into creating it, not necessarily the document itself. So it's ever changing, and you can always go back and change the words around if you find something that fits better. The next component is inputs. Inputs are the resources you need to implement your work. These generally fall into 3 major categories. You have personnel, you have funding, and you have, finally, supplies. So think about the things you need to implement your work. If you're having trouble doing this at the moment, you might want to wait until after you outlined your activities. The next component is activities. This is basically a list of the things you plan to do. If you're being asked to create more than a list here, you might want to create an impact statement for each activity, but that's not necessary for this section all the time. The next component is outputs. Outputs are quantifications of your activities. You want to ask yourself, what is the best way to describe this activity in numbers? Is it the number of people who will participate, the number of sessions that will take place, the number of times this activity will be put on? Is it the number of minutes people will be there doing that activity? It really depends on what the activity is. So ask yourself, what is the best way to describe this activity in numbers? Finally, we have outcomes, and outcomes are the changes you want to see because of the work you're doing. They're usually changes in knowledge, attitude, and behavior. They might also be changes in policies, systems, and environments. So look at your list of activities. Consider why you're doing that work, what changes you want to see. You might also have to organize your changes into short-term, intermediate-term, and long-term changes. I think of this more of a spectrum, which is why sometimes it's hard to figure out where an outcome might go. Short-term changes, they're usually changes that happen right after an activity. They're the changes you hope to see when someone walks away. You have a direct impact on those changes. Intermediate-term changes, they're slightly more broader. They happen because the short-term changes took place. And long-term changes, they're the broadest. They're the changes that take the longest time to happen. They're changes you might not have a direct impact on, but you contribute to. Don't forget to download a summary of today's video in the description below. And if you have any questions about data use,
This will make your life so easy. Taylor, show this. Okay. We usually stop at outputs, the activities and the participation. And the inputs is what do we need? And then let's go to the next one. And you know evaluation goes across. Let's go to the next logic model. Okay, here we go. What do we need? Staff, volunteers, time, money, knowledge, all of that. What is our current situation? Then the outputs, this is what we usually count: the number of workshops, the number of events, the number of activities, the amount of food, whatever it is, the number of diapers, the number of volunteer hours, and who are we trying to reach? And you notice it talks about decision makers as well as participants. They use the term clients in here. I like the term customer. Well, customers, that's in there too. And these assumptions that we're making should be not just we made them up in our head. And this is where we do not talk about is the medium term and the long term impact. And I'm going to use a literacy example. So let's just say that one of the things that we're going to do is start a literacy program for adults. And we have a curriculum. That's the knowledge. The curriculum has been designed. We've laid it all out. We know who we want to reach. The short-term results may be people come to the classes. They come to the classes. People are starting to make progress. The medium-term results really would be people get their GEDs, because this is what they're working toward. The ultimate impact is that people become self-sufficient. Now, you can't look at your program. You're not going, again, you don't do longitudinal studies. You don't say, I'm going to follow these people for the next 15 years, because you're not. But we have the data on every issue that shows us if this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And when we build this in and you work backwards, I'm left-handed, so I love working backwards. You work backwards from the long-term impact all the way back to what you need. Usually we start on the left versus going backwards, saying if we're going to, to do this, then we need to do all of that. Please, the external factors. Chandra talked about the hurricanes. That's a given for you all. It's a given. One of your external factors is really that a lot of you are not totally, I don't want to say control, but I'll use control of the people who you're working with, because it's anointed, appointed, and you have to. That's an external factor. The environment is an external factor. What's going on in the environment. I mean, gosh, we realized during COVID that the external factors had everything to do with everything we were doing. So the idea, and let's be realistic about the external factors. It is what it is. We don't have to lay blame or anything like that, but what are the external factors that are going to, that are going to implicate and are going to have impact? For example, if we don't have good transportation, how are people supposed to get to the literacy class? If we do an online thing, do we know that people have internet? Do we know that, a reliable source of internet? So we can propose all the things we want, but if the external factors are, are working against us, many of the summer food programs have external factors that are working against them. The kids are supposed to come to a certain place, the community center or something, to get food. The parents aren't home in the daytime. So how are the kids supposed to get there? And then what happens is we hear, oh, the kids aren't coming up here for lunch, so we don't need this program. No, they can't get there. So that's an external factor that should be built into the project. You say, wait a minute, we don't do transportation. That's why you partner with somebody. No, you don't do transportation.
Miss Cynthia has a question.
No,
Okay.
She just answered it. My
Oh,
question
okay.
was, supposing
it?
they don't have money for bus or to get there, you should include that in, excuse me, as something that you can add in to provide transportation, or as you say, get a partner.
Yes, and you do that up front. This is before we into it 6 months, and we got all this food sitting around, and we got the people saying, so this program isn't really didn't need it in this neighborhood. Y'all aren't using your food. That's why you have to analyze the external factors. I want to show you the SMARTY goal. Okay, these are the SMARTY goals. You all know SMART goals: strategic, measurable, ambitious, but not crazy, realistic. We talked about time bound. And what's the newer parts of SMART goals: inclusive and equitable. Going to what the conversation started is, we're trying to address systemic injustice, inequity, or oppression. And we're centering those who are the most marginalized or underserved. We're not centering ourselves. We're not centering our organization. And it's about sharing power. So I am going to stop. We had a lot more for you, but you will get all of the information and we'll take some questions. We have some project management tools that you will get, a Gantt chart. And again, you may not use any of this in its raw form, but we hope that we've helped you to think about things a little bit different. Can you show the last question, Shayla, and we can just talk about it? The unlearn. You know, we learn a lot, and you know, you all and Chandra, they offer so many wonderful opportunities to learn. But if we're actually going to think like project managers, what do we have to unlearn? Go back to the slide on unlearning. What do we have to unlearn? Because this is about transforming the way we have always done things into a project management mentality. I love how Chandra, she planning her family reunion like a project manager, you know, but we should do that. So this idea about transformation, what is it that we need to unlearn? And going to some of the things that you all talked about, you can't change what you refuse to confront, meaning some of these people who are anointed and appointed, this don't work. So what are we going to do with it? So let's just have a conversation is if you're actually going to begin to use a project management mentality, it's again, it's a way of thinking. We showed you a bunch of stuff, but it's really how you think about things. And we don't have to do the poll. We can just talk. What do you or what does your organization need to unlearn? Anybody?
I can say that we need to unlearn sometimes the status quo. And
Say more about the status quo.
so there's been a set way or set template that people have utilized embedded within their work, their framework. And then when you go to modify that or add to it, it is not necessarily received well because it is a change. Yes. Yes, we've always done this. And so how do you address that, especially knowing like it's something that has to be unlearned by so many people. It's so many varying levels at the agency, on the board, within the staff. And sometimes the work culture, the culture of the entity,
It's the culture.
yeah,
Yeah.
it covers up to the point where you can't go forward. You can't, you're looking back. In my family, we have this Sankofa bird that my cousin and I always try to incorporate when we plan things, because it's like you're flying for it, but looking back, so you have both in the perspective. And it is key to be able to do that. Sometimes you have to pause, take a moment, but trying
Breathe.
to sometimes
You have to
breathe.
stop. Pause. The
Right.
pause is so important.
Yeah, to unlearn. And then I know strategic plans are what's built in, but sometimes you end up inputting the same things because the same people are there that say the same things, that say we need to work on the same work. So it's a reiterative process. And I remember previously you talked about just the board formation, like the storming, forming, norming, performing, like those phases, and it's reiterative. So it's almost like that with an organization, an entity, especially when your members change, your executive C-suite changes, who has a voice changes, or whose voice is leaned on more heavily can occupy the
And why?
space.
Why?
Yeah.
Why are we doing it? Because they're the oldest person in the room, because they're perceived as having more connections, or because they got on a cute shirt? I don't know. I mean, it can range all the way from, you know, from that. So there is a lot, you know, to unlearn. One of the things we need to unlearn is we pack too much in for a 2-hour session. So we need to unlearn that. Anybody else?
Don, did you have a comment? No, I think she just unmuted.
Okay. Well, we thank you all so much. I think that question, when you take this back, and I hope you take this back in a way, and a lot of what Chandra was talking about is culture, that's what has to shift. And again, that's a long-term proposition, but we can take strategies back. This is a strategy, and these include strategies. And so the idea is taking some of this back in a way that people can digest it. This is very hard to digest like this. We crammed way too much in here, but you take it back in little pieces, and you keep telling your stakeholders, you know, this is why we need to do this. Thank you, Miss Cynthia. you know, this is why we need to do this. And yes, it's going to feel funny. This is not the way we've always done it, but take it back in little pieces. And we just wish you all a success. Why would we have tools that we're not using? We got all these tools now that we know. We know more about governance. We know more about project management. We know more about grant. We know more about everything than we used to know, and we are not using the knowledge. So we just thank you so much. And we're around. Shayla we have a slide, but you're going to get some session enhancements and some forms. And again, you may not use any of it in whole cloth, but just the idea of thinking. So we thank you for everything that you do and for your involvement in your community. And we hope to see you again soon. Everybody have a good summer. Oh, our quote,
Thank
trying to
you.
manage a project without project management is like trying to play a football game without a game plan.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much, Miss Cynthia. All righty. Chandra, thank you.